So welcome. My name is Rebecca Ritter. I'm the head of teaching and learning at the Shefa School. And I want to welcome you to our second in the Shefa Center's spring webinar series. Tonight's webinar is entitled How to Support Your Child's Executive Functioning, and we'll be hearing shortly from Kristen Vieregg. Before we do so, I want to just tell you a little bit about the Shefa School and the Shefa Center. So the Shefa School is a Jewish day school in New York City. We have 211 students in grades 1 through 8. We serve students who have language-based learning disabilities, and we are enrolling students for the fall. So if you work at a school or you are a parent and you're interested in learning more about our school, feel free to visit our website. And as part of our work at the Shefa School, we also have a broader mission of serving the Jewish day school community across the country. And we do that through the Shefa Center, which is our outreach arm. It is the way in which we deliver professional development and training and consultation to schools across the country, Jewish day schools who are looking to find ways of better meeting the needs of students who have learning challenges and learning disabilities. We do that in a number of different ways, and we invite you to learn more about our activities. A couple of upcoming programs that we have through the Shefa Center. We offer one-on-one school consultations where we help support schools on a variety of initiatives. We host school visits at Shefa for particular groups of educators and administrators. If you're interested in learning more about that, please visit our website or email us at center@shefaschool.org. And we just opened registration for our annual summer courses. And this summer we are again offering the PIF reading program and our multisensory math program. PIF will be at the end of June and multisensory math will be at the beginning of July. Both are virtual and they are open to educators across the country. So feel free to sign up via our website. There's an early bird discount if you register before March 31st. So please check that out. And before I introduce Kristen, I just want to thank our many supporters and partners. We're able to offer this webinar and many of the Shefa Center's programming free of charge, thanks to Prisma and UJA Federation of New York, the Naomi Foundation and the Covenant Foundation, and many, many other community-based supporters that have been tremendously supportive in partnering us to help make our work happen. And before I turn it over to our speaker this evening, I just want to introduce Kristen. Kristen Vieregg is a speech language pathologist department chair at the Shefa School. She's a New York State and North Carolina State and ASHA certified speech language pathologist. Kristen graduated from MGH Institute of Health Professions with a concentration in literacy, and she's worked in private practice and several New York City private schools. Most recently and currently. We're so lucky to have her with us at the Shefa School for the last several years. Kristen has lectured extensively on this topic, and before we begin, I just want to invite you to put your questions in the chat should you have them. We'll keep a list of those and Kristen will have some time towards the end to answer. So for those of you who are just coming in, welcome again. This is our webinar through the Shefa Center, how to support your child's executive functioning. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Again, welcome to tonight's webinar in which we're going to talk a bit about how to support your child's executive functioning. I'm so excited to see that there are so many people who have joined us tonight. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Kristen Vieregg, and I am a speech language pathologist. Over the course of my career, I've served as a speech language pathologist, as a reading teacher, as a writing teacher, and I now serve as the speech and language department chair at Shefa. So within this role, I've worked with teachers to improve their instructional language, to differentiate instruction and materials, and more recently consider how executive function skills impact the students' performance in their day-to-days. And with that, how can we as educators and as parents support our students who need help with their executive functioning? So we have a bit of a jam-packed agenda today, but by the end of our hour together, I'm really hoping that you have a better sense of what executive function skills are, when they develop, and what they impact. And then we're going to spend a large chunk of time discussing some concrete strategies that we can use to support our children's executive function skills. And at the end, as Rebecca said, I'll save some time to share some resources and answer some questions that you may have. But if you have questions along the way, please drop them in the chat. My colleagues will take note of them, and we'll have some time at the end to address them. So let's get started. And in doing so, I actually want to start with you. Let's hear from you. In the chat, answer this question. When you hear the term executive functioning, what words come to mind? Nice. Planning, organization, lots of organization, sequencing, nice. Task initiation, time management, staying organized. These are wonderful. Thank you for participating. And there are so many responses. This is wonderful. So when we talk about executive function skills, we're really talking about 11 specific skills: response inhibition or impulse control, working memory, emotional control, sustained attention or attentional control, task initiation, planning or prioritization, organization, time management, goal-directed persistence or problem solving, flexibility, metacognition, and self-monitoring. So these are 11 specific skills that we lump together when we say the word executive functioning. And if we look at the diagram of the brain, we see that different parts of the brain are responsible for different things. So for example, our language is typically located in the left hemisphere of the brain, in the temporal lobe. But executive function skills are controlled by an area of the brain called the frontal lobe. Within that frontal lobe, there's a section at the very, very front called the prefrontal cortex, and that's the section of the brain that's responsible for these executive function skills. And even though we have this part of the brain that's responsible for these executive function skills, they're not really innate, meaning that we're not born with them. So we are, though, born with the potential to develop them. And with that being said, executive function skills start to develop in infancy, but they continue throughout our childhood, throughout our adolescence, and all the way into early adulthood. Executive function skills are also impacted by the experiences we have and when we have them. And I think what's really important to note here is that most individuals have an array of executive function skill strengths as well as executive skill weaknesses. So individuals may have strengths in one domain, but weaknesses in the other. So for example, you may have a child who's actually extremely organized. They have folders for each subject, they're color-coded, they put away their materials very quickly, but they struggle with time management or prioritization. Or you may have a teenager who struggles to get started, but they have stronger problem-solving abilities. So again, to label it as a whole, cluster executive function skills, that's what we say, but there are 11 sub-skills within that really can characterize how the student performs or how the child performs. So all of the executive function skills that we listed are important throughout life. In school, which is pretty common, and I think a lot of us are familiar, executive function skills help in many, many ways. So it helps with children following directions, avoiding distractions, controlling responses, adjusting when rules change, and persisting at problem solving and managing long-term assignments. But I think sometimes it's harder for us to see how executive function skills help beyond school. So socially, and in terms of behaviors, executive function skills help children develop teamwork and leadership. They help with decision-making, working towards a goal, critical thinking, adapting, and being aware of yourself and others. And more significantly, it's actually really impactful towards our health. So executive function skills have an impact on good health because it helps people make more positive choices about nutrition and exercise. It resists the pressure to engage in more risky behaviors like drug use. And it helps individuals be more conscious of their own safety and others' safety. So strong executive function skills are really, really critical towards good health patterns. And in today's day and age, where there's so many stressors out there, executive function skills actually help us respond and cope to stressors in our life. Another long-term impact of executive function skills is professional and economic success. So with better executive functioning skills comes better organization, the ability to solve problems, planning for long-term projects, and adjusting to changing circumstances. And in a lot of jobs today, these executive function skills are necessary. And so if you have those skills and if you've developed those skills, you are more able to successfully perform in the work environment. So I believe some or many of you have attended Yoni Schwab's lecture on ADHD recently, but I wanted to take a quick minute to talk about ADHD and its relation to executive function skills. First things first, anyone who has ADHD will have difficulty with some, many, or all of the executive function skills. They go hand in hand with ADHD because one of the subskills of executive function skills is impulse control and attentional control. That being said, there may be, again, some skew and variety of what executive function skills are strong and what are more challenging and considered a weakness. The other thing I would like to note, though, is that kids without ADHD can also struggle with executive function skills as well. So it's not just students with ADHD. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention some of the recent research that is coming out about the link between social media addiction and cognitive function, specifically executive functioning. So recent research has found that the increased use of screen time in infancy was associated with poorer executive function once the child was 9 years old. And similarly, they have found relationships, not necessarily causal, but relationships between social media addiction and impulsivity, as well as social media addiction and inhibitory control. All of this to say is it's just really important to be thoughtful about when we are introducing social media, how long our children should be using social media, and in what format. I think that poses a greater discussion, but I wanted to just point out the recent research on this topic. Okay, so now that we've had a brief sense of what executive function skills are and have some insight into the overall development of these skills, let's think about the executive function skills required for different tasks. And let's start off with something super simple, at getting a glass of milk from the refrigerator. So I want you to take a minute, jot down all the steps that you think are involved in that task. And if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, tell me how many steps did you write down for getting a glass of milk from the refrigerator? You can also just keep it private, but if you feel comfortable, share it in the chat. Nice, I see a variety. 5 steps, 6 steps, 8 steps, 3, 10, 11, 9, about 10. Awesome. So if we look at the steps involved, and this is an activity from the book Smart But Scattered, which I'll talk about throughout my webinar, there's actually a lot more steps involved in this task than you anticipated, or at least that I anticipated. So it says, decide to get up and go into the kitchen when thirsty. Get a glass from the cabinet, put the glass on the container, open the refrigerator, retrieve the milk, close the refrigerator, pour the milk, return the milk to the refrigerator, then decide to either drink it on the spot or in the family room where you were prior. But along the way, you must resist the impulse to grab and eat the chips that were spotted in the cabinet. And then you must resist the impulse to grab a sugar-loaded soda instead of milk. And then if none of the usual glasses are available, then you must check the dishwasher so you don't pick up the crystal goblet. And if the milk is almost gone, then you need to soothe those frustrations and resist starting a fight with your sibling because they definitely had that milk. And then make sure not to leave a milk ring on the coffee table so you're not punished. When I first read that, I was very much taken aback. I had not anticipated all of these steps involved. I stopped counting after 10. That's great. So if we look at these steps, now I want you to think about all the executive function skills that this task requires. How many do you think are required for this? The answer is pretty much all of them. So all of these tasks have executive function demands. So task initiation, planning, prioritization, organization, response inhibition, goal-directed persistence, flexibility, emotional control, working memory, and sustained attention throughout. So again, a very, very simple task that really taxes executive functioning skills. So when we're thinking about at-home activities and chores that our children are expected to complete, we should always really consider the executive function demands associated with the tasks, whether it be in the area of self-care, such as brushing your teeth or showering, or specific chores like cleaning your room or completing homework. Things that involve time, starting a chore, shifting between tasks, or socializing with your siblings or parents. All of these skills really tax executive functioning. And similarly, most activities in school tax executive functioning as well, whether it be pertaining to academics, material organization, time, or social situations. Executive function skills are really required to navigate your everyday activities and complete them successfully and efficiently. So the big question then is, if our children and students struggle with some or many of these executive function skills, what can we as parents and educators do? So our big take home for the night that I want you to just hold on to is, first and foremost, the big idea is to model the behaviors and modify the environment. So that comes from the premise of, when you can't control your child's behavior, you need to first focus on what you can control, and that's yourself and your environment. Afterwards, then you can start to teach these executive function skills, not just in the classrooms, but in real world contexts as well. So we're going to dive into 5 specific strategies tonight that will help you model, modify, and teach these executive function skills. Okay. The first strategy, and perhaps my most favorite, is something we're going to talk about called zones. So students with executive function weaknesses often have difficulty orienting themselves to a space. They may struggle to identify the space itself, the time, the objects, and/or the people in the room. That makes it difficult for them to make efficient decisions. They may also have difficulty organizing materials and/or ideas. So as a result, it's super important to create designated categories in space, or what we call zones. So this strategy really modifies the child's environment and models the executive functioning skills. So by creating these specific zones, we're helping the students categorize and orient themselves in space in order to carry out tasks in a timely manner. So zones can really be created anywhere. Let's start with zones at home. So let's say you want to create zones in your child's bedroom. You may have a zone for sleeping, which includes a bed, or a zone for working, which may include a desk, a chair, and school supplies. You may want to create a zone for dressing, which might include a closet and a dresser. And within that dresser, you may want to have more zones for shirts, pants, socks. Maybe you also want to have a designated zone for playing, which has toys and board games and stuffed animals. And so I'm going to show you some examples of what that may look like. Here's an example of a bedroom with specific zones. Again, the idea being that children will understand where certain objects should be stored and where to find materials when they have these zones in place. It will make organizing, planning, and completion of certain tasks like getting dressed, doing homework, more successful and efficient. You can see here that they had a dressing zone, a playing zone, a working zone, and a sleeping zone, just as I had mentioned. Here's another image of some more zones within the bedroom in which they have more specific zones. So there's in the dresser a zone for shorts, pajamas, pants, long sleeves, t-shirts, and underpants. And in the play zone on the right, there are pictures for each zone, like balls or Barbies. I myself have created zones in my toddler's playroom. So for example, we have an instrument zone, a building zone, a stuffed animal zone, and a library zone. And it's pretty incredible to see how quickly she came to recognize the zones just by me modifying the environment and by modeling where the toys go. And so with having these zones, it's a lot quicker for her to find toys, so she's less frustrated. It's also much easier for her to clean up at night, which is everyone's dream. So zones should also be used in the classrooms. So this is really, really important for classroom management. Think about creating a teacher zone, a space where the teacher has their desk, books, and supplies. Students should recognize that actually that's not a space for them to be. But on the other hand, there should be a zone for students and for student supplies where students can look for pencils, pens, papers, markers. It can also be really helpful to have a hand-in zone where students can hand in their homework assignments, or something that we do at Shefa is hand in work that they're particularly proud of. And the students know that when something comes up and they're proud of their work, they can submit it and then we can hang it on a bulletin board. If some of your students need to take breaks for occupational therapies or social emotional components, it can be wonderful to have a break zone where there's a timer and break cards and specific supports that the students can use. So depending on your classroom, you may have more zones or fewer zones. But again, the idea is that by creating these zones, you're modifying the environment, modeling the organization of these spaces, and in doing so, the students will become more efficient and organized in their planning, organizing, and carrying out of the tasks. So here's one example of how a school created zones in their classroom. They decided on a homework zone, a locker zone, a teaching zone, and a material zone. So pretty general categories. But once these zones were established as a teacher, I might print and laminate this classroom map for students to learn and navigate the zones. You would probably want to introduce it at the beginning of the year, maybe after a long weekend, or maybe after a long break. So here's also a bird's eye view of a classroom with specific teacher and student zones, as well as spaces for water bottles and subject-specific zones. Again, printing and laminating the space map can be really, really helpful for the students. And here is a zoomed in look at some of the zones that we use at Shefa. Again, we have that hand-in zone, the break zone, and the student supplies zone. And I will say the students love this, especially when they're moving from classroom to classroom, because when they move from class to class, there's not as much of a disorientation now. They know exactly where they can get their materials. They know exactly where to hand in their materials. So it's been really helpful for the students and also for the teachers. The other thing I will mention about zones is that it should happen on your walls as well. Wall space should have zones. Students with executive function weaknesses often have difficulty attending to the most important information, and they can become distracted by visuals. Visual distractions impact students' task initiation and completion, as well as their time management. So consider creating zones that highlight what the strategies or information are related to, so such as a history wall or a language arts vocabulary wall. And then make sure to create a visible divider of these sections. It can be with tape or it can be with a marker. But in essence, you want to reduce the amount of mental energy it takes to figure out where a strategy is located in the room, and then it will then reduce the time needed to execute the task. So that's strategy number one, using zones. The next strategy we'll talk a little bit about is schedules and routines. Schedules and routines are really, really important for students who have executive function weaknesses. Schedules create structure within what we call the chaos of the normal school day and break the day into more manageable chunks. And actually, once a schedule becomes predictable, you're essentially creating more of a routine. And that's really important because once you make something into a routine, you're actually using a different part of your brain, and that takes the pressure off the frontal lobe. So by using a routine, you're reducing the executive functioning demands, and you're allowing students to use other executive function skills in that moment. That was a really cool fact that I had learned in my research. So routines are really, really important for reducing executive function demands. And I will note that schedules and routines aren't just for school. You can create your own morning and evening routines that you follow each day. This usually helps students get to the bus a little bit easier or get to bed more quickly. I know myself, my daughter has a bedtime routine that she's become very accustomed to, and it's not as much of a fight anymore. So you want to create a morning routine, an evening routine, so that again, those executive function demands are not taxed. The other thing that I think is really important is on days where school isn't in session, you may want to create a schedule for your students. It may be that the day is just too open-ended and we need to make more manageable chunks for them to move between. So I love this example of a schools out daily schedule that may happen on weekends, it may happen on a day off, or it may happen over a vacation. But it can help students move from task to task when the day is really very open-ended. Okay, so we've done zones, we've done schedules and routines. Now we're going to talk a little bit about countdowns. So children with executive functioning difficulties may have difficulty shifting between tasks. So this particular strategy of countdowns is helpful to move from one task to another. So countdowns are helpful because you're giving children a time frame and description of what will happen, and you're periodically reminding the children of how much time is left before the next activity or task. This may be something as simple as a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown with your hands, or it may sound something like this. In 20 minutes, it'll be time to finish breakfast and head to school. In 10 minutes, it will be time to finish our breakfast and head to school. In 5 minutes, it's going to be time to finish our breakfast and head to school. In 1 minute, it will be time to finish our breakfast and head to school. So again, countdowns are really, really helpful from shifting from one task to another. And that's because time management is really, really challenging for a lot of our students. Time management is an executive function skill that students often need support with. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, executive function skills develop over time. So just because a student has difficulty with time doesn't also mean it's an executive function weakness. It's just not developed yet. So our students and our children need help with time. Students with executive function weaknesses may have particular trouble estimating how long tasks will take, how to plan when multiple steps are needed, and how to stay on schedule. They may struggle to keep future events in mind, and as we just mentioned, shift between tasks. So our big take home here is to provide students with visuals that will help them develop their awareness of time. So what do those visuals look like? So in an effort to make time visible, there are many different tools out there to help. The timers on the left, time timers, sand timers are great tools to show students how much time is left with an activity. These timers are really helpful when students need to shift between tasks. So in essence, these tools on the left really serve as a countdown, which we discussed a few slides back. However, Sarah Ward, who's an incredible speech language pathologist who specializes in traumatic brain injury and executive functioning, and I'll be referring to throughout tonight's presentation, she argues that if we want students to learn how to better manage their time, we actually need to make all aspects of time visible, not just the time that's remaining in an activity. So what does she mean by that? She means that we need to show that not only the time that has elapsed, but also as well as the time needed in the future. So she argues that one of the best tools to do that is an analog clock. So using an analog clock and an expo marker and some Post-its, you can mark the start time, the stop time, and the midpoint time. And as time is elapsing, students can refer back to those markers and ask, how am I doing? So if we were to take a look at the clock in the top right of the slide, an analog clock, you can see it's currently 10:10. So what I would do is I would mark that time with a Post-it and I would say start time, 10:10. And then I would shade in the rest of the time for the remainder of the period. So I would go till 10:40 and I would shade it in and put the Post-it and label it as end time. And then in the midpoint, I would put another Post-it and say midpoint. And so as the time progresses and as the minute hand moves down, you're able to then point out, oh, this is the amount of time that has elapsed, but let's see how much time we still have left. And then you can ask your students, how are you doing? Do you need to slow up, slow down? Do you need to speed up? They can also ask the students if they've been distracted or focused. So it's a really wonderful tool that helps students really make sense of time, not just how much time is left, but also how much time has passed. Okay. So the next strategy we're going to talk about is in relation to future planning. Oftentimes when kids or students struggle to follow directions, we tend to think it's related to their understanding of language. And in many cases it is. But there's also a lot of times where it's in relation to their executive functioning skills. So what do I mean by that? In order to complete a task or plan for the future, the very first thing that someone needs to do is engage in what's called mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal is the process of creating a mental image of yourself in the future space, executing the plan. So in other words, there needs to be a visualization of the task being completed. So if you tell your child it's time to get ready for bed, before they start carrying out the task, they need to first visualize in their head what that looks like. Okay, my pajamas are on, my teeth are brushed, my hair is combed, my face is washed, I'm in bed, and I have a calm body. If you're not able to make that picture in your head, carrying out the task is going to be very, very challenging. So this is actually why checklists can be a little bit problematic in nature. So for a long time, I made checklists for all of my students and all of my clients to complete. And that's a wonderful tool to use. But after researching and hearing from Sarah Ward, I realized that if you don't first visualize what the finished product looks like, they aren't planning for the future and they're not able to execute the task as I'd hoped. So what can we do? How do we build our child's capacity to plan for the future? We help them practice mental rehearsal by having them visualize the finished product first. So in classrooms, when you tell the students to clean up the room, you may want to provide a picture of what that means to you. So on the left, you can see the visual that states, before you leave, make sure the classroom matches the picture. It then specifies the desks are straight, there's nothing on the desks, chairs are pushed in, and there's nothing on the carpet. This picture, in essence, serves as a checklist, but it also has the added element of mental rehearsal, a visual representation of what it looks like to complete. Similarly, at home, when you tell your child to clean up their room, give them a picture of what that means. So in this particular case, the parents split it into zones and each zone specified what they were looking for and what it looks like. So for example, in the desk zone, the garbage is cleared and thrown away. The desk items are placed in the appropriate drawer. And the parent details what all of those features are in each zone. So again, instead of relying on a checklist, consider shifting towards this visualization strategy to help with mental rehearsal and future planning. This also works really well with homework. So instead of giving students a checklist, as you see on the left, you want to try using a visual of what the homework should look like. So it says on the right, turning in homework, stop. Does your homework look like this? And you'll notice that the teacher labeled specific features, name, date, complete sentences, etc. Once students have completed the mental rehearsal, they can then move on to the next step, which is task planning. That includes planning, sequencing, prioritizing, and organizing. So again, Sarah Ward, brilliant SLP, created this strategy called Get Ready, Do Done. This strategy is helpful for planning, prioritizing, and organizing. Again, this is another one of my favorites. The premise here is to plan backwards to execute forwards. So first, just like we did, you visualize what the done looks like, which is the box in red on the right-hand side. After that, you can move to the do box, which is the center box in green, to determine the steps you need to do the activity. And then you move to the yellow box, which is get ready, and determine what materials or mindset you need to get started. Only after you've worked through those steps can you then start to execute the task by moving forward. So here's an example of one way to use Get Ready, Do Done. It works with many different activities, whether it's at home or in school. And in this case, it was wrapping a gift. So let's say it's the holidays and you want your child to help out with the gift wrapping. Okay, that requires a lot of executive function skills. And so you decide we're going to use Get Ready, Do Done to help. So the first step is to visualize what the done looks like. So everyone wraps their gifts differently. Some use bows, some use ribbons. So how do you want your gift to look? And you would incorporate a picture of that on your finished product. Then you can work through with your child the steps that they need to take to get to that finished product. And finally, ask them then what the materials they need are to get ready. Once you've outlined all of those steps, then you can have them move forwards by going through each box. So this strategy can, like I said, be used with anything. In this case, it was an arts and crafts activity. You can see the teacher used a copy of the art project to complete the done section, and then specified the steps needed to do, including tracing, cutting, gluing, and coloring. Then she recalled the materials she needed to get ready, like scissors, markers, pencils, papers, and erasers. And so by working through these future planning steps and working backwards, the students are set up to succeed and are usually able to move forwards much easier. I'll also say that this strategy is especially helpful for students with anxiety because it gives them a really clear framework of what is to come in the class and what's to come in this project and how to succeed in doing so. It takes away a lot of the uncertainty in a classroom period or in a day at home. So at home, you can use this strategy for chores like setting the table. What do you want the table to look like when it's done? Then what steps does your child need to do to sequence them? And then finally, what kitchen utensils and materials will they need to get ready? So here's an example of a Get Ready, Do Done that we've used at Shefa. Our 5th grade teachers have used Get Ready, Do Done to help organize the students' desks. And they found it to be extremely successful. So after they worked through this as a class, the students were able to independently and confidently organize their desk and also do it much more efficiently than they had done it prior. So it's a great future planning tool that helps students prioritize, sequence, plan, and complete tasks more confidently and efficiently. Okay, so for the next strategy, we're going to be talking about calendars and planners. I'll start with the caveat that different planners work for different people. My husband, for example, likes to use Google Calendars, but I myself prefer paper planners. And it's no different for our children and our students. So part of the process is figuring out what type of planner works best for your child and involving them in the conversation, including the shopping. So some of my most successful experiences with clients have been when I've taken them to Staples and I've looked through the planner section with them and we've talked about what stands out to them, why they chose the planner, why didn't they like a certain planner. So involve them in the process. That's the first step. The second thing I would say is to really start exposing them to calendars and planners outside of the school context. So it's helpful to consider maybe having a family calendar in which your children can see what types of events or tasks are added. So maybe you just start with adding birthdays or play dates or sporting events or family dinners. But then over time, you can start thinking aloud. I noticed that we have a play date on Saturday. I better finish all of my laundry on Friday. So I'm going to write in laundry. Or, wow, I noticed you have 3 basketball games on Sunday. You may want to start your homework on Saturday and write that in. So again, the big idea here is to take school kind of out of it and start modeling why this is a functional tool in everyday life. In school, teachers can begin to model and have students practice. Teachers can begin to model and have students practice how to use a planner in a few different ways. So first things first is you should always try to incorporate time either at the start of class or the end of class for students to write their homework down and then always check it. So most often our students are not ready to do this on their own. Some are, but some are not. And so that teacher check is important. Another thing that comes up a lot from our middle school teachers is that the students always say, oh, I'll just check Google Classroom when I get home. Why do I need to write it down? Yes, part of that is true, but we want to establish good executive functioning habits. So you can work around that notion, but by maybe even writing down a few instructions that are not on Google Classroom. So for example, Sam, you're assigned questions 1, 3, and 5. Susie, you're assigned questions 2, 4, and 6. So this will help students realize that Google Classroom is a great post for everyone to access, but your planner is your own special tool that's going to help you determine what you need to do and when you need to do it. When you have upcoming assignments that are larger, like projects or tests, you should model your thinking aloud and break down the project into smaller, more concrete chunks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few slides, so stick with me on that one. The last note I would also just make is, as we discussed before, make time visible. So estimate the time you expect it to take students to complete their work, but then ask them to write down the actual time of completion. It's a really nice reflection tool for students to understand how they're doing. It shouldn't make them feel bad, but it should recognize their pacing. What made it take longer? Was I distracted by something? Maybe I should pick a different room. Or, oh, that particular topic was really hard for me. Why? So it does allow for more self-reflection in their homework completion. So you can do some, making time visible, estimated versus actual time in a planner, or you can use a sheet like this one related to chores. So it has the chore, how long will it take, when will you do it? And you can add another column of how long did it take me. Or you can use a chart like this one where it's more school-based. Again, you can have them fill this out and then reflect on how long these tasks took. Both of these charts are from the book Smart But Scattered. Again, I'll refer to it at the end when I share some resources, but they have some wonderful charts to help with this. So the big take home here regarding calendars and planners is that it's really challenging. It requires a lot of executive function skills. future planning, working backwards, time management, task initiation, flexibility, and working memory. And so it's going to take time. It's going to take modeling and support to find the right planner and to use it effectively. I myself did not start using a planner until I was a sophomore in college. And I think I have some pretty strong executive function skills at this point. So it does take time, and it does take a lot of flexibility as well. That being said, one of my favorite planners that I've used with clients and students is the Order Out of Chaos Academic Planner. It includes class sections, a box for task completion, and my personal favorite is it has after school hours. I love that section because that's where the students are going to need to plan out when they're doing their work and when they have other obligations like sports or extracurriculars to work around. This one, I will say, I think there's a back order if you do want to purchase them. So you may want to start looking for next year. The other planner that I love is the Setup Success Planner. It includes sections for homework, looking ahead. So that involves projects or studying where it involves multiple steps, after school, chores, and fun. So it also has separate categories to plan for some of the events that occur outside of school, but there's no time elements here. So that's one of the drawbacks to this planner. But again, every planner works for different people. Okay, the last strategy we're going to talk about tonight is for following directions. So if students have executive function weaknesses, whether it's attention, emotional regulation, impulse control, task initiation, working memory, they're likely going to have difficulty following directions. So our big take home for these tasks is to break instructions down into smaller pieces and keep the instructions concrete. So what do I mean by that? Let's say it's 4 o'clock and your child is just getting home from school. I know that some students get home later, some get home earlier, but regardless, you greet your child and say, "Hi, sweetheart, I hope you had a great day. You want a snack? Okay, come in, take off your shoes, then wash your hands, then let me know what kind of snack you want." That's a lot. It may be too much for your child to attend to, hold on to into their working memory, and figure out where to start. So instead, try chunking the directions. Still greet them. You can say, "Hi, sweetheart, shoes off, wash hands, snack." And you may want to repeat it. Shoes off, wash hands, snack. And then you can just use your fingers to remind them there are 3 steps. Similarly, in school, when greeting students, it's in our nature to say something along the lines of, "Good morning, it's so great to see you this morning. Come on in, unpack your backpack, hand in your homework, take a seat quietly in your desk." That's lovely, but it can be really challenging for our students with executive functioning to execute those directions. So instead, chunk it. Good morning, backpack, homework, sit. And again, remind them by using your fingers. When you have larger projects or tasks or more open-ended instructions, again, it's really important to keep them concrete. So instead of saying something like "clean your room," try saying "pick up 5 toys off the floor." Instead of saying "study for your test," specify and say "create 10 index cards for chapter 3." Or instead of saying "do your homework," be concrete and say "read your word list 2 times." So in terms of following directions, we want to chunk the information and be concrete. Okay, so we've covered a lot today in a really short period of time. In the spirit of executive function skills, let's end by breaking it down a bit. What's one strategy that you want to use to improve your child's or student's executive function skills? You can jot it down on a piece of paper, or if you feel comfortable, please share it in the chat box. Zones, I love it. Amazing. Chunking, future thinking, clock writing, amazing. There's a whole gamut of strategies. That makes me so excited. So as I mentioned, I was going to save some time to go through some resources that are helpful and then answer some questions. So I mentioned some resources from throughout the presentation, one of which is Order Out of Chaos. Order Out of Chaos is a wonderful website. They have a ton of resources, materials, and information about executive function skills. And they also provide specific ways to coach your child or student. They have an amazing Amazon storefront, actually, with specific materials for different executive function skills. So take a look at that. The other is Smart But Scattered. It's a wonderful book that includes a lot of information about executive function skills, but it's also really has some helpful questionnaires for parents and for children, and specific charts and graphic organizers to help with daily events and chores. And the other thing I would also just keep a lookout for is Sarah Ward. She's phenomenal, and her presentations are incredible. So those are my favorite resources. And now I'd love to end with some questions.
Kristen, thank you. That was really chock full of information, and gives us a lot to chew on and think about. Kristen's just going to be looking through some of our questions that were posted in the chat. And while she does that, I'm just going to put in the chat a link to sign up for our upcoming programs through the Shefa Center. Feel free to check out what we have. And if you don't see something that you want, reach out and let us know. We do a lot of customized workshops for individual schools and groups of people. So we're more than happy to talk with you about those offerings. We will throw the resources in the chat. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen to answer some questions. And again, thank you so much to all of you for joining us on this Tuesday evening.
Okay, so there are a lot of some great questions in here. So one that I see here is how to tell apart one's need to develop their executive function skills versus some sort of diagnosis like ADHD. So that's a great question because, again, executive function skills develop over time. The way you would essentially determine that is through testing, because they would compare that compared to their age peers. So, if a student has a diagnosis like ADHD, they often do executive function assessments as well to determine where their strengths are. I would also say that the Smart But Scattered book has some great questionnaires for you as a parent to say, does my child need more help with this particular skill? So whether it is a weakness or whether it is that it's just not developed yet, it will point out where the child needs a little bit more support. Another quick question is, who's the SLP I mentioned? Her name is Sarah Ward, SARAHWARD. Another question here is, how do you manage all of these zones in a more resource-constrained environment? Again, I think it depends on your environment and it depends on your students. So, if you have a smaller classroom, you don't need a lot of zones, but you need to think about what you're asking your children to do. So student supplies, all schools and children need to have something to work with. So maybe that's one of the zones. Or if you have, if you're focusing on vocabulary, maybe you have a zone on the wall for just vocabulary. So it really depends on what the goal is for the class, what the students need more support with. But it can be very general zones or it can be more specific. Someone asked, by showing the done portion of a project, does that partially inhibit a child's creativity in their attempt to have their final product look like the picture done, as opposed to the way their own creation may look? That's a great question. I think in some areas, teachers put an example done, so it may not be the exact worksheet so that their language isn't being copied or there is some variety. You can also talk about that. You can say, this is what the done looks like. It's done because it has X, Y, and Z. Yours may look a little bit different in terms of its color or design or whatever it may be. So I think it does open a bit of a dialogue there. Someone said, do children with weak executive function skills do poorly with open-ended activities, specifically open-ended art? The answer is maybe. It depends on their strengths and weaknesses. If you notice that they are struggling with some of those tasks, it may be time to break it down into more manageable chunks, or maybe do some of that future planning and get ready, do done. And then there's a lot of more questions. I'm just looking. Sorry, I'm trying to get through all of them. As kids get older and life gets more complicated, it's very challenging to stay on a regimented schedule with your child. For example, Passover really shifts kids' sleep schedules and daily routines. Totally understand life happens and it's impossible to have a routine every single day. But I would see if there's any part of the day that can be a routine. So whether maybe your sleep time changes, but you still do the same exact bedtime routine. Or maybe you have dinner at a different time, but in order to get ready for dinner, you still have that same routine. So again, make it into more manageable chunks. It doesn't have to be the same throughout the whole day, but maybe just parts of the day. I have a student who struggles to start their work and will sit for 10 minutes or more before doing any work. How can I support this student? I think that student sounds like they would really benefit from Get Ready, Do Done. Gives them a clear outlook of where to start, what materials they need, and all the steps involved. Someone asked about middle school students who are moving from class to class. I think that that can present its challenges. Our middle school students and actually our lower school students do move from class to class. So that's where having a space map and laminating it and giving it to the students can be really, really helpful when you establish zones. Again, you may want to introduce it at the beginning of the year. You may want to have a refresh after certain long weekends, after long breaks. So I think that that's one way to help with moving from class to class. I think that was the question with regard to zones. Okay, there's a question about improving executive functioning in teens, especially with managing phones, which don't help us staying on task. That's a really great question. And my daughter is only a toddler, so I cannot even imagine how challenging this can be. I think, there's something to say that it just leaves the room while you're working. It can be really hard to hold back that to regulate the impulse control there of just picking up your phone. I myself feel like I'm always picking up my phone. So sometimes it's really helpful to just remove it from the room and park it in a different room. So during homework, it goes on the kitchen table, something along those lines, but it is really challenging. That would be my tip so far. The child is quick to get things done, whether it be sloppy or not. Should a teacher or parent slow them down to show them how to break things down? I think that using the pictures of mental rehearsal and future planning and showing the visualization of what a product should look like is a great first step for kids who speed up and work too quickly. A lot of times our students who rush through things, we actually print out their best work, or we photocopy their best work and put it on their desk to show them that this is what all their work should actually look like. So whether it's making sure their name and dates on the board, their handwriting is legible, it's incomplete sentences, we first start with that picture before we get into any form of checklist or anything like that. Okay. As a parent, my daughter who has ADHD gets overwhelmed when given a task in school for individual completion and will not begin unless she has one-on-one support. How do we break this cycle? It's a great question. And I think it depends on the subject. It depends on a lot of factors. But I would probably want to start her with some get ready, do done. So talking about what the assignment looks like, visualizing in her head, figuring out the steps that she needs to take in the meantime, and then figuring out what materials she needs, because it sounds like task initiation is really, really hard. And that could be because, she doesn't have a future plan of what it should look like when it's done, or she doesn't know where to start. How to motivate teens to think forward and motivate them is challenging. It is really challenging. And there is an element of buy-in here. When I work with clients who are teenagers, I'm very transparent with, families and saying that there is an element of buy-in. And so finding the right planner can take a lot of back and forth. So I think it is challenging. It definitely is challenging. And like I said, my use of planners didn't start until college. So it really, really depends on the student.
I think we're going to wrap up there, Kristen. I know Kristen has a ton of wisdom to share and could do this all night, but in the spirit of time management and important sleep routines, we're going to thank you again, Kristen, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we hope we'll see you again soon. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.